And the modalities I've looked for have been about the individual finding the solutions. So it's not so much about the practitioner as it is the individual going within and asking the question, like, how did I get here? And more importantly, what steps do I need to take to get out of here? How do I free myself from anxiety? How do I remove this block toward this life goal? You know, anything and everything we can possibly do to get out of stuck is really truly one of the most profound pursuits of our lives, because the less we're stuck, the more golden and serendipitous and joyful and exquisite life is.
Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who is out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode.
Hi, welcome to the show, The Exploding Human. I'm Bob Nickman. That woman you just heard at the beginning there was Sue Callahan, and I'm going to be talking to her today. She is a spiritual explorer. That's what I've decided to call her, and more about that in a second. First, I want to thank you guys for listening to the show, and I want to invite you to come and visit my website, which is theexplodinghuman.com, TheExplodinghuman.com. All my episodes are on there, pictures of my guests, synopses, a little bio about myself, a donate button if you'd like to donate to the show. That would be awesome. And come and check out the website. But I really would like to invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I've got all of my episodes also on YouTube, and that is The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. Add the with Bob Nickman, and please subscribe to that YouTube channel. As soon as I get enough subscribers, I'll be able to stream some live interviews with my guests, which I'm really looking forward to, so thanks for that. And now the end of that commercial for myself, and let's talk about Sue Callahan before we meet her. Sue, I describe her as a spiritual explorer. She's been studying a lot of different modalities over the years, and today we're going to talk about a few things that she's very interested in and been working with most recently. One is the light language, which I didn't know anything about, and she's going to tell us about light language. She has studied shamanism, so we're going to be talking about that, and we get into some stuff about childhood and healing children as opposed to adults, a little bit different. She does both. And the educational system, we had a little digression into that, and what are we teaching our children and how are we doing that? And so she is a wonderful person, and she's really about the individual finding their own solutions, and she facilitates that. But the main two things that I took away from this is that it's all about love and compassion. So let's enjoy the interview, shall we? This is Sue Callahan. You've spent a lot of time with various modalities, disciplines, explorations into all kinds of things. So what currently are your interests? Let's just start with one of them, and let's go from there and see what happens.
So right now I'm really looking at light language as being one of the most powerful modalities I've ever had the sort of pleasure and honor of working with. And essentially what light language is when we have we say a prayer, or we have any kind of incantation, or any even thoughts or words, everything that we say and do actually translates into what is called light language. Sort of like when God said, "Let there be light," what came forth was this light language. So what happens with this modality is you have an opportunity to basically say to life, or to God, the creator, this is what this individual desires, deserves, intends to do at this time. So it could be heal a condition, manifest more money, really experience true self-love, total forgiveness. It can be any theme, basically. And it's very, very comprehensive in its approach to cancer and diseases, has a very different way of approaching it from the perspective of it's not something you kill or attack. It's a different way of disarming it. It's very, very spectacular and highly powerful transformational modality. So that's really the area I'm working in most profoundly at this time. And I'm so honored to have this opportunity to do it, because basically you create this mosaic it's this exquisite mosaic that's beyond the mind and what the ego could come up with. It actually comes from beyond the ego, and it basically, once the individual, say if you came and you had a condition going, we would say, okay, heal this condition. And then basically it looks at not only, what it looks like total health, then it also looks at like what needs to be broken down, what needs to be healed deeply in ways that are so profound and so complete. And then it goes from there, and it begins to say, okay, well, this is how we tend to it, and this is how it needs to be like rebuilt, if you will.
Okay, I love this. Now, here's my question, and I'm sure somebody listening is going to think this. What actually happens? Let's say I come to you, I have a condition, I have a physical condition. We'll just pick anything, doesn't matter. And I say, Sue, I have this condition. How can you help me to heal this? That's what I would say, probably, right? You're a facilitator in helping someone. Are we going into a meditation? Are you doing things with, I'll just pick anything, crystals? Or what are you doing?
So basically, the way this works is we do a general interview, and from the interview, we select the appropriate theme. It's very simple, actually. It's very simply stated: wellness, condition healed, or whatever. And then I begin to be guided on the language, this very specific light language in a beautiful pattern, on how to construct. It's actually like a grid. And so then once the grid is constructed and it's set, the language itself is activated, and it begins to do its thing. It begins to work. And you begin to see these changes and shifts that come about very profoundly in your life. It's not necessarily about avoiding, feelings or emotions or whatever has got to come up, or the process of healing. You can't really say, you don't really know exactly how the process will unfold. But what you do know is that you've put this on the course to heal.
Now, I understand that it's beyond words. I'm assuming that it's beyond words. But how am I communicating what's going on with me to you, and what's coming back, and how is that, can you, try to put it into words in some way that, are you having an experience and that energy is being transmuted to the other person? What is, when you say a grid, I'm still, it's vague to me, and I know it's beyond words, but what is happening in the room between you and this other person?
So what's happening is it's usually once the grid is set that the healing process takes place. But if you can imagine, remember in the first Harry Potter when he played chess for his life with Ron, it's kind of like that. It's like an omnidimensional. It's an omnidimensional grid. And so basically the language is set forth like it would be on the chessboard, only it's more expansive than that. And so then what ends up happening is once it's activated, it begins to send a message to the creator. This is what needs to happen in order for this to come about. So we continue a dialogue. We continue to have a conversation. But what usually ends up happening for the individual is they begin to have a clarity, and they begin to understand within themselves that, one, some of the root causes, like what has happened, how did you arrive at this? How did this disease present? Can be for a whole host of different reasons. And I've been trained initially as a medical intuitive, and did a lot of that work for a long time, looking at diseases from different perspectives, mental health issues. Pretty much I've kind of covered the entire gamut in my career. So, I'm never surprised, there's always, I don't mean not surprised, but life is always surprising, because we might end up thinking that this disease came about because this situation, or because we were exposed to a toxin, or because of, whatever predisposition, but that might not necessarily be what happens. So what happens for the individual is they begin to have an understanding and a knowing inside how this has arrived. And as the layers begin to come off, and you begin to go deep down into the process of this healing and see the root and follow the roots all the way down to the source, you begin to have a much greater understanding of the choices that you've made, or that you're making, or maybe perhaps the people or the work situations, or whatever it is that's influencing the environment for disease, or whatever the condition or situation is that presents. So like, for example, with money, sometimes when we come in through families where there's been a lot of scarcity, that's deep in our cells. It's deep in our DNA. So what we want to do is we want to clear out all of the DNA. We want to clear out all of the fields. We want to clear out the cells, the subatomic particles. This is a very deep dive. And like I said, it's so far, like, if, as somebody who's done a lot of healing work, and through many different, not a million different modalities, but for many different modalities I've been trained. Once I arrived at this light language, I just realized, like, this is so comprehensive, and it's beautiful because in many ways it takes the individual out, like the person, the mind, the ego, all that, that part of the healer steps aside, because you're really profoundly being guided on what this person needs to heal or change or transmute or shift a situation, or bring about something spectacular that they wish for in life.
Mm-hmm. Can you give me an example of someone, don't tell me their name, who's come to you with a specific issue, and how that was talked about and dealt with, and what the result was?
So right now, like, it's funny because I do this also with kids. So it's like reminding me, I'm thinking of some kids specifically.
Great.
And, we attempt to be unconditional loving as parents, but that doesn't always happen, as we well know, and we always have to take responsibility and whatnot. So what happens with this is that you notice that kids have it seems like, from my experience, a much faster response time. It's almost immediate. And so from what I've seen, when children are willing to deal with root causes, and they are very honest, and they very much want the discomfort or source of anxiety or whatever it is that's presenting to clear, they will be so spectacularly honest. And so what I've noticed is that the response, let's say, for example, with somebody that has really been deeply wounded by a parent, just because of circumstances in life, not intentional even,
mm-hmm.
It can manifest as quickly as a massive, like, intestinal, almost like an acute intestinal, I don't even know what you call it.
Stomach ache?
Stomach ache.
You always
but where
hear kids say, "Oh, my stomach hurts." That's like the big one.
Right, because
I don't want to go to school. My stomach hurts.
Because it's hard to stomach life, right? Because there's some aspect of life they can't stomach. And so it can come as fast as that. I'll notice that kids that, like, maybe 2 days after we set the grid, absolute, like, emotional outburst or release. And the thing that's telltale about it is that by the time it's over, which seems so acute, or like boom, like this waterworks of like, wow, what is just happening? They're lighter and better. And they, like, shake it off and, like, oh, yep, that was then. And, once the release is gone, they go about their way. So I think part of it, for what I'm noticing, is like, it's when dealing with, for example, with anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Which is a huge thing
for kids. Yeah. So anxiety, disappointment, and heartache, there's a lot of that in childhood, where friends and this happens, and, they can't, they're trying to trust and love, but they've been hurt or whatever. And, the way it manifests is usually either some kind of a physical release or an emotional, like, let go. And then it's a thorough and complete, like, purifying cry or something like that. And then boom, next thing you know, they're just lighter. But it's a process, and then it might be 3 or 4 days later, we'll have another something and they'll have this clarity. And do you remember when, I'm remembering when this happened when I was young. I don't know if my parents remember that kind of thing. And they're so aware of these original traumas that, maybe to an adult didn't seem particularly traumatic, or they might not even remember it. And yet for the child, it's so pronounced. But then once we go into that site, it's gone and they become freer and freer individuals. And the beautiful thing is then they don't have to carry this on into adulthood and, start digging it out at, 40 and 50 and 60.
It sounds like it's a little more in-depth and quicker than talk therapy.
It's very profound. Like I call this my PhD. I mean, after 20 years of training, this work is the most profound I've ever seen.
So you use a lot of different things that you've learned over the years to work with these kids?
Well, I'd say perhaps in talking to them. But I would say even more than that is I use the years I've done this to get out of the way. Because it's so much better if the more the healing practitioner gets out of the way and the divine guides, the more, this is my opinion, is just more powerful. And it's more honest. And, children will be very honest. In the case of working with adults, if we look at this, what I've noticed with the adults is it's not like a volcano's about to go off and boom, all of a sudden we've done all this work. It's a very complicated process, but it's beautiful. Like there's so much joy in the creation of this. You can feel the love, and it's basically this love that we've always deserved. And so it's basically saying like, this is who I am. This is what I deserve. And this is the restoration of this most exquisite love. And it's requesting the help, in its purest form, in the Creator's language. So it's not like me, the person, going in saying like, oh, I think this is what you would need based on these different modalities of training. It's really very focused, specific. And then, even as you work your way through this masterpiece, as I call it, this mosaic, you get a nudge, and I let it sit for some time, and I let it call me back. And, oh, do I need to shift this slightly, or is it this or that? And then I'll go back and work with the individual and say, do we want to slightly adjust it this way or that way? So that's kind of it in a nutshell. But what I noticed more with adults is there's a lot of self-awareness where you might all of a sudden be triggered. Like if you've read like The Presence Process or any of those books that talk about life triggering, like life being a trigger, and our ego gets poked, and then suddenly we realize we're really angry or frustrated, or there's something arising, and you realize that you've been set up to release this energy. So instead of going into the story and who triggered it and who poked your ego, you go into the part of your body or the feeling or the felt perception, and you say, okay, this is there, and you try and follow it down to its roots. That's essentially like really beautiful, really solid practice. And so one of the things I've done is learned how to do this. I've helped kids learn how to do this so that they can follow it down. But more importantly, when we talk about adults, there's a lot of life down there. There's a lot of experiences that they never were able to process. Our parents weren't very self-reflective. They weren't self-aware, and unfortunately weren't particularly able to be authentic. And, being able to be come from a place where they genuinely made amends, for their behavior, their choices, for the trauma they caused, for whatever it is. Some of us have been lucky enough to have those parents. My parents, like really, as they got older, as they've gone through their own self-reflective process, have been hugely healing for me, because they've taken such measures to make amends and to really so beautifully seek forgiveness, but really just to be honest and be authentic. And very few people get that. So if you didn't have that growing up, then there's a very good chance that you've got a whole mess of energy that's buried down in your body, in your fields, traumatic experiences, and they get compounded. So what we're looking for is this most beautiful, pure way of going through the whole being that basically says that anything other than the love or anything other than the health needs to be cleared and released. So while you might get triggered as an adult, that can definitely you're definitely going to get triggered.
Mm-hmm.
Something's going to come up and you're going to feel the anger or the resentment or whatever, sadness, right? Shame. I mean, shame's a very toxic energy. I wish nobody would ever deal with shame again. Right? Ever.
Be a nicer planet, wouldn't it?
Right? And just this kindness and this love, and there's a kindness and love that is so pure in really the Creator's love for us. So, that's kind of it. People will note, I would say with the adults in this light language work, it's more of a process. And but you have this keen awareness on such a regular basis of like, oh my gosh, I never realized how much I do this, or I think this, or how much that situation bothered me. And it seems so much to me easier to deal with it because you just feel this like, oh, I just need to be kind to that part of myself. Like, this is coming out. It feels uncomfortable, but you'd rather be uncomfortable with it coming out than just have this like sort of blanket discomfort because so much life was buried down there. And frankly, very few people in our community and society were really taught how to deal authentically with feelings and emotions and trauma. I mean, I'm a parent, and I know you're a parent, and I say to my friends and my community, my job is to teach my children how to meet life wherever it is, to meet it authentically, so that whatever life presents or throws at them, that they know they can handle it.
I had a memory just now as you were talking. Insignificant to anyone else except for me. I was very young. I was probably 3 or 4, and I was sitting in a parking lot at a shopping center. My mother went in somewhere, and I was just sitting there in the car. This was back in the 50s, so I guess it was safe to leave a kid in the car. And I had only experienced adults being loving. My parents, I'm sure they got mad at me for little stuff, but, grandparents, neighbors, there was nothing. And I remember thinking, if I'm exuberant, which I was, that all adults will respond in kind. And I was saying something to somebody walking by. I don't remember what it was, but I remember feeling this joy of being alive. And the person said something to me. I don't remember what it was. They shut me down, and it was awful. Like, it just stung. It shocked me because it had never happened. It was the first time that I recall basically, F you, kid, get out of here, shut up, whatever it was. And it just like hurt my whole body. And I was like confused and really sad. And then my mother came back, and I said, somebody was mean to me. She goes, oh, just get over it. It's just, And so I, obviously I went on, I forgot about it. But I never forgot it. And it was very insignificant in terms of, any type of level of real cruelty. It wasn't hitting or, anything terrible like that, but it was a shock to my system. And I remember sort of making a decision, I need to be careful with being exuberant and joyful in the world. I have to be really careful about that because that could happen again, and I don't want it to.
Right. That's it in a nutshell. Like, as you're saying that, I can remember my mom took me to the supermarket, and I think I snuck like a pack of like butter rum Lifesavers or something in my pocket. And I remember like I got caught, and I can't remember the manager or whatever came over and, exposed me for taking the Lifesavers. Well, I have never forgotten that experience, but as you say it, like I wouldn't ordinarily think of it, but I just had this moment of like, gosh, it's like I can feel the frozenness inside of like, caught, and of course you hand it back and you're so busted, and then you get in trouble at home. And, it's interesting because I'm learning, I went through the training for restorative justice in this community, and they were talking about penalties and punishment and, in us really asking us to really evaluate, how we approach or consequences for what people, what kids and, adults do. And frankly, I look really little in my mind's eye seeing myself like that, but that imprint was very strong. I mean, I never really had a picking things up kind of issue ever after that.
Yeah, scared you enough, right? Scared straight.
Totally. Scared straight.
Yeah, and it's just it's funny because obviously there's various degrees of trauma. And that's the things we just described to me are very light compared to the trauma most people and maybe I've had other stuff that's more severe down the road, but as I've read a lot about trauma, I'm pretty fascinated with that idea and how it lives in the body. And when an adult gets triggered, that trauma is relived on some level. Sometimes it's actually relived almost exactly. But it gets, it's an interesting thing, that reactivity from something that happened in the past that, maybe a stimulus of 2 will create a 10 reaction because of the past.
Right. Well, remembering that when you experience trauma from your past, it imprinted from the perspective of the child at the age at which it happened. Yeah. Or the adult, whatever. Mm-hmm. So remember, when we're kids and we experience anything, it's all or nothing. That's kids can go from 0 to 10 like that. And then they, go back to 0 or 1 or whatever, but so that felt perception it's imprinted authentically from that age and from that perspective. So that's why, sometimes we'll see even in our children a response or reaction. We're like, whoa, what is going on? But it could be that the original wound or hurt is triggered, and then whatever is contributing actually releases both of them, and it has more of an escalated sort of reaction, but then they've actually released this. Because really, kids want nothing more than to be in equilibrium. They want to be just in a beautiful, uncomplicated world. And I would say in many ways, everything we're doing right now in society is creating the opposite experience for them. Mm-hmm. We're just jacking it up so that anxiety, which, many people, look on as the fraternal twin to depression, is just a constant every day. It becomes so familiarized that they don't realize that there's life beyond anxiety. And then the brain creates the scenarios to perpetuate that because that's what it knows.
The anxiety of what I see with kids in schools, especially because that's where they're spending most of their time, is this idea of competitive achievement that permeates that whole system. It's like here, based on grades and numbers and testing and looking at almost your peers as adversaries in a sense. If they get it, then I don't. And that creates a whole interesting thing. And it's all based on this sort of false, it's all balanced on the head of a pin. It's kind of like, if I get good grades, then I'll get into a good college. And if I get into a good college, I'll get a good job, and then I'll make a lot of money, and then I will be happy.
Okay.
So what we're going for, I think, is some sort of a fulfilled, happy, joyous life based on things that don't necessarily take you there. I'm sure some people, that path does work. I don't know. Never did for me. But that's where a lot of the anxiety comes from, I think.
Right, because really, if you think about it, everything that you've just described is some future condition, whereas happiness is born inside.
And it's in the moment.
Yeah, and it's in the moment. But it's also, if we as parents really looked at our job as keeping our children in a place of where they're capable of being curious and exploring and really nurturing them. And I always say, light them up like a Christmas tree. What do you love to do? What engages you? What, brings you joy and fulfillment? If we really spent their childhood focused on that, it would be a very different society. I have a little bit of a theory that the school board the college board has actually hijacked American well-being. I think they have an extraordinary amount of power. I think families across the country are beholden to the system, and they're afraid, and it's perpetuated by this fear. If you don't get into this school, then you won't get into that graduate school, and blah, blah, blah. And I feel it's time for American families to take their health and well-being back. And when did American universities become that powerful? Because they weren't when we were in college. I mean, not everybody went to college. Not everybody felt they had to. And you certainly, I wasn't panicked in middle school about whether or not, my grades were at any specific level. I wasn't worried about it.
Never thought about it for 1 second.
And if you have children that are wired like that, they're worried about it all the time.
Yeah. Did you ever hear this one? It always made me laugh. It's A students work for B students at businesses owned by C students. Because the lesser involved in that academic game, the more free their minds are to create, is the theory. I don't know if it's true, but it's a great saying.
Well, I have a theory also along those lines, is that, many of the kids are highly, highly intuitive. And so a lot of what I look at is, how are we tending to these intuitive kids? Because really it's the intuitive kids that are going to solve the problems. Because their minds are expansive. They see solutions. They can see the complexity of situations. They have a broader perspective. And so doing like the number crunching and whatnot actually is not exactly how their brains are wired. So, the tests don't test for that. I mean, when universities start testing for intuition, we'll know we've actually started making some progress in our society. Because a lot of the kids are highly intuitive. And in addition to that, those kids are usually very sensitive, and the cookie cutter, British Empire system that we've adopted and embraced fully does not serve those kids very well.
Yeah, I always think about the idea of sensitivity, like we're missing out on great people because the sensitive people get kicked out of the thing because they just go, I'm not doing this. This is like hurts too much. I'm thinking of, particularly even in the medical profession, the way they set up schooling. It's so grueling and competitive and physically demanding that the people who are actually sensitive, who would make great doctors, just go, I'm not doing this. It hurts too much.
Right.
So if, we miss out on those kind of special people.
Right. It's like playing a violin like an electric guitar.
Yeah.
Right? That's exactly what it's like. And, it seems like we just don't have enough leaders in our society and community who are starting to point it out and say, this isn't working for the greater good. Right? So a lot of what I think about is, how do we really tend to the kids to give them a place so that they can feel safe, and then allow them the space to figure out what really motivates and inspires them.
Do you know one of my biggest memories of, I guess it was second grade. I was in second grade, and I guess I was learning how to read and write. But the teacher decided to bring in a butter churn. It was a barrel with this handle or something like that, or we just shook it. And we sat in a circle and we sang some song, and we passed this thing around. It's about all I remember from second grade, just how sweet she was, and us shaking this thing, and we made butter. And then somebody brought in some bread, and we ate this buttered bread, and it was this wonderful moment in childhood that's really stuck with me. Now, is it important? Yeah, it is important. Is it a money maker? Does it get me, a job and a house? Maybe. I don't know. Probably not. But it stuck with me. Here I am, 60 years later, and I remember it. I can feel it. I can see the carpet. I can see the teacher in the chair. And how much joy was there. And I don't know if they do stuff like that now. I'm sure there are some teachers that do that, but it was the experience was what I remember and what I felt. Like, this is great.
Right. But also, think about it, that's transformation from liquid to mass. But, the thing is, at the end of the day, that we need to give, we're cutting away at the fun time and the recess and the play and the art and that kind of stuff to make way for the, different standards that the teachers have to meet. So, like I said, I'm hoping that the system starts to break down, because we need kids to be free and we need them to have some fun. And I feel like that's one of the things we've done, is really extracted a lot of the fun time out of school. I mean, what could be better than making butter for class than actually sitting and writing sentences or something like that, or spelling, which that even spelling is now no longer in class. I mean, the system's changed. I'm sure there's great reasons for that. I'm not really sure about what that is about, but at the same time, I can't imagine how great it would have been to sit right next to you and been like, not only are we making butter, we got some bread to follow it. That's pretty awesome.
It was a great day.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing I like to do with the kids, though, as well, is I like to work with them in a shamanic tradition, which is really restoration of power. I'm a lifelong student of the shamanic tradition. And for most people don't really know, it's really the restoration of power. It's really calling back the self to the self. And so the reason I like working with it, it's so transformational. And it's, as I said, I was always looking for the fastest or the cut to the chase modalities, because people are experiencing trauma and they are experiencing, high levels of suffering. And so my mission has been for the past 20 years to find the fastest modalities. And when I finally found my way to shamanism, I just thought this is the most genius tradition I could ever possibly imagine. Now I've got this other one, the light language. But the reason I bring it to the forefront is that, again, the modalities I've looked for have been about the individual finding the solutions. So it's not so much about the practitioner as it is the individual going within and asking the question, how did I get here? And more importantly, what steps do I need to take to get out of here? How do I free myself from anxiety? How do I remove this block toward this life goal? Anything and everything we can possibly do to get out of stuck is really truly one of the most profound pursuits of our lives, because the less we're stuck, the more golden and serendipitous and joyful and exquisite life is. So when I originally started training the shamanic tradition, I remember thinking how genius of a protocol and a tradition and a modality when they never re-victimize the victim. That's inherent in this tradition. It's not like you rehash things. So you come at it from the perspective of okay, we recognize that this went down. I lost my dad young or whatever. It's not my situation, but let's use that as an example. And obviously to be separated from a parent at a young age is so painful. And it's your dad or your mom, and that's just the tenderness of the heart. It really takes a lot to not only rebound, but then once that original trauma or the sadness and the disappointment, is able to, it sort of settles in and we've moved past the grief stage. I mean, grief is actually a gift. Grief comes in and holds us when anything traumatic in life happens, when life disappoints, when it goes in a way in which we'd really prefer it didn't. We don't want to separate ties with somebody we love, or we're disappointed that this friendship has ended, or that this job that we absolutely love is now no longer, relevant or exists, or whatever is the situation. So the idea is that life happens, and when you come at it from this tradition's perspective, it says basically this happened, but now what we're asking life is to show us what steps we need to take to move through it so that we completely turn over every single rock, so that we don't have to continue to be held back or feel the emotions or feelings or whatever the consequences from this situation, this triggering event. And so what life will do then is, through this very personalized way where the individual, as I was trained to do it, I train the individual how to do it themselves so that they get the answers, they see for themselves what steps they need to take and how to move through it. And then we basically set up a protocol and they're able to work their way through it. It's a really beautiful tradition and it's empowering. It's not like you get hit over the head and suddenly, after doing let's say a session in the shamanic tradition, what happens with it is that suddenly one day you notice gosh, I don't feel judgmental anymore, or I don't feel that shame. It's just like you just notice that you're so different And you start like Humpty Dumpty comes back together, and you restore that power and that love. And it gives you a chance to look at life with optimism and with like curiosity and wonderment. You know, anybody that experiences trauma has most likely experienced the feeling of being on the outside, because that's what trauma does. It basically kicks us out from the group, because suddenly you've had this experience that nobody else in the community has had. And it doesn't matter what age you are. Suddenly you become that person or that family, right? And suddenly, like in my family, my younger brother died at 16. We did not see that coming. It was a freak car accident, and he ended up suffering, irreversible brain damage. And my mom was one of the leaders at a administrator at St. John's. And she was also the liaison for ROPA, which was the Regional Organ Procurement Agency. And she knew that they most oftentimes got the organs of young kids. And so she basically, as an administrator, they had us go, everybody was allowed to go into the ICU. And a couple days after my brother got into the car accident, they removed his organs. We saw the helicopters take off. And we buried him. It was very traumatic for our family. We became that family. My brother went to Loyola High School. He was that sophomore kid.
How old were you?
I was 18. So it was...
Same age, essentially.
Yeah, he was about to turn 17. We were only a year apart, and we were so close. He was just truly embodiment of love. He was just so wise beyond his years. But he checked out at 16. It was a couple of weeks before I graduated from high school and before I started college. So even that for me was really traumatic, because then when you go to college, everyone asks you, how many kids are there?
But it's also a big transition for people that don't have that kind of tragedy.
Right.
Going from high school to college, that's huge.
It's huge. So, I bring up the trauma because everybody has different forms of it, but we became that family. We were the ones that lost the brother, or my parents, their son, their beautiful son. So anytime trauma happens, you get tossed out, and you're looking around for anybody that can relate to you. It doesn't matter what the circumstances. Trauma is experienced individually. So whatever is, it's sensitive to you, especially if it's your children or your family members, and you just love them, and you're like watching what's going on or transpiring or whatever is happening. And you're looking for other people to look you in the eye and say, I know what you're going through. I'm going to walk you through this. Like, that is essentially what my job is. I will go anywhere with anyone. I continue to make myself available to understand it from the perspective of like, how is it that this person's going through this? What is that experience like? What is it like when you can't trust what your brain is indicating, or when you really absolutely cannot tolerate how you feel inside? I've worked with kids with with different diagnoses, like let's say in the autism spectrum or whatever they call that now. And, my experience was like, it was like this very, very uncomfortable, like, it's like white noise. Like when you remember we had transistor radios and we couldn't get on the station.
Sure.
That's what it was like for the kids that I worked with. And it's like, how does that feel to go through life where it feels like you're in white noise all the time?
I can't even imagine that.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, it must just be, it's like torture.
Yeah. So then, in some of the mental illness situations, that white noise is your mind saying the same thing over and over and over again to you. It just depends.
And then you take other people that don't have that getting impatient with you, or thinking what you're doing that on purpose to cause trouble, or, get it together.
You're trying to bug me. So that's the other thing. Like, one of the things I've learned over all these years is like, we just don't really know what's going on over at our neighbor's house. We just don't know. We don't know what this person is experiencing. And the only way we do is if we can come from a very compassionate place and ask, what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
What's going on over there? How's that feel? We need to be more curious with people and less experts, because that's, unfortunately, we're kind of insecure as a society. We're convinced that our children, reflect our self-value and worth because of where they are, what instrument or chair or what schools they go to. And we've got the bumper stickers and the license plate covers. So we've got all these deep insecurities, and yet at the same time, which forces us to want to be expert parents. But really the truth is we just don't know a lot. We don't know what's going on.
And it's so easy to judge other people until you're them, and then you just go, oh man, was I off?
Mm-hmm.
I've had a number of those over the years where I've thought, I know more and I'm doing it right, and then all of a sudden, oh, it's me now.
Right. And the reason we do that in many ways, I mean, this is not 100%, but because we're so judgmental with ourselves. And when you become so accustomed to holding yourself to a higher standard, you kind of have this, you're looking around and you think that, that's kind of how we're supposed to treat others.
I find myself, watching my mind judge, which is a little bit better than actually just judging without thinking about it. Not much. I got busted this morning. I made some comment about somebody. I got some information, and I just immediately went, what a pig. My wife goes, that's a terrible thing to say. You don't know that person. Maybe he's not aware. Maybe that's going to come, and more people will want to make this change that he's going to realize. Like, all right.
Well, the thing is like all of the issues that we have on this planet right now are issues of consciousness. That's the thing. If your level of consciousness has you still at the stage where all you really recognize as being important is your survival, providing for your family, yourself, your security, the current administration speaks directly to you. Yeah. But if your consciousness has evolved to a place where you begin to see the importance of the larger community, you can actually tend to people outside of your immediate community, or, you're able to actually hold science as a valuable discipline. And, it's like those are all of the challenges we have are issues of consciousness. So the idea is that, as we elevate consciousness within ourselves, we are most profoundly affecting it in our community and the larger community.
Yeah, I have to hold on to that idea because I get so frustrated with, like, how does somebody who's, aware and let's say conscious or more conscious deal with people that just don't see it at all? It just doesn't even exist for them if they walk right by it.
Part of it is that what you recognize is that anything that drags you into that conversation is other than consciousness. So it's kind of, it can trip us up and it grabs us, and it says like, it gives us that us versus them mentality. Like, how could you not see? How could, it's got a lot of how coulds. So the more conscious you become, the more you're like, oh, that's just a distraction.
I was listening to a guy, he was a professor somewhere at some college, and he said, the only way to really change people's minds is to meet them somewhere where they already are first. You have to go there. And it might be the simplest thing, like, oh, I smoke cigarettes and you smoke cigarettes. What kind do you like? And then you have to slowly bring them. Instead of being adversarial, you have to find some kind of commonness, some kind of connection, whether it's a human connection or just a superficial one. And that's the only way to really change somebody, because screaming at them obviously isn't going to work. I mean, that's the first thing. Somebody screams at me, they're done. I don't listen anymore, So I thought that was an interesting thing. It sounded exhausting.
Right.
But I understood it. I do it a lot with questions. I mean, that's one of the reasons I like to do a podcast, because I like to ask questions. That way, it creates a situation where somebody knows that I'm interested. And I'll do that in situations that are actually, if I'm around people that I'm uncomfortable with, that's what I do. Out of some of it is genuine curiosity. I want to know what makes them tick. And other ways is so they can actually say what's going on with them without feeling judged.
But at some point, each of us lost our ability to trust. And so there's this fine dance of actually being able to go to this place inside where you can meet the point, at the time and point in your life when you lost that trust. And it's about having the courage and the perseverance in many ways to actually keep pushing and pushing until you absolutely transcend that experience, where suddenly you say, like, gosh, when I was young and my parents didn't meet my needs, they couldn't hold me in the way I needed to. They like hold me in the sense of like really provide the response or the attention or the care, the compassion, or the level of activity. You know, all of us at some point in our life lost or found that whatever our circumstances were in our home, that we couldn't trust that it was going to be provided for us. So then basically that's when the ego comes in and the ego says, I got this. You know, that's really my wish for everybody, is that everybody can kind of touch these different points that, you know, really ripen us to have a, you know, this spiritual experience in a human body. We can't avoid situations. We're going to have to feel. There's going to be upset. There's going to be traumatic experiences. There's going to be, you know, hardships, you know, relative to the individual. You know, we're meant to go through this together. We're not supposed to go through it by ourselves. And then hopefully we actually have enough of a tribe around us to go through it in such a way that we can come out the other side, or all the way through, ideally, to experience the magic of life.
Mm-hmm. That sounds good to me. Let's get started, everybody. How does somebody get a hold of you if they want to do some kind of work?
So I have, my website is SueO'Callahan.com.
Let's spell it, because
okay, so
Callahan can be a lot of different ways.
It can.
Probably not, but go ahead.
So,
S-U-E.
So SueOCallahan.com. I'm also available on Facebook at Sue O'Callahan and Instagram.
Yay. So if you want to contact Sue O'Callahan, that's how you do it. And thank you so much for coming to talk to me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
Super enjoyable time.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Hey, thank you guys for listening to the show. Appreciate it. And please visit the website, theexplodinghuman.com, if you want to donate. Much appreciated. And also, I would love to invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. That is The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. All my episodes are up there, and you can check those out. And hopefully I'll be streaming some live episodes once I get enough subscribers. So please subscribe to that YouTube channel. And thank you for listening to the show. Thanks to Sue O'Callahan. Check out her website, and we'll see you again. Thanks.